You're listening to 1232, an audio epic, produced by RumbleStump Entertainment. Hello, 1232 listeners. This is Callie Sioux, and I'm excited to tell you about Dramify, the ultimate platform for creators and fans of audio dramas. With oodles of genres, hundreds of shows, and thousands of episodes, Dramify is your go-to streaming service exclusively for family-friendly audio dramas. Whether you're a devoted listener or a creator of a family-friendly masterpiece, Dramify has something for you. And guess what, 1232 listeners? You can now enjoy 1232 on Dramify. Just go to dramify.com/1232. That's DRAMAFY.com/1232 and get started for free. Happy listening.
1232 is sponsored by Phil Bob Borman Art, a nationally collected skyscape artist, mastering the shape and color of western skies and towering cloudscapes, inspiring viewers to look up at the glory of God all around us. Phil Bob Borman is represented by Insight Gallery, Fredericksburg, Texas, Legacy Gallery, Scottsdale, Arizona, Caudry Gallery in Whitefish, Montana, and the Museum of Western Art. Contact for available paintings or commissions at philbobbormanfineart.com.
Chapter 24. The great gate swung open. Ragar and his squire galloped to the steps of the great hall. The enchantress waited at the entrance, wearing a cloak of fur and black satin. The sun was making the sky gray up above, blending with the color of the stone keep. Ragar rode his foaming red charger all the way up the steps and dismounted. He stood before Zorreale, their eyes locking.
The rebellion
He bowed in homage.
is broken, my queen.
She looked over the black riders below, who had 20 captives in a shivering group in their midst. She began a smile in the corner of her mouth as her eyes lifted to see the smoke of the burning forest.
Shall I chain the prisoners, Enchantress?
She looked over them once more, most of them women. She raised her chin.
No, hang them.
Zorreale said, unmoved by their pleading looks.
And her?
Ragar said, pointing to Vera, who had barely made it out of the smoke alive. She had followed them out of the forest, tortured and disoriented.
Do whatever you want with her. She has lost her usefulness.
At that, Zorreale turned away to enter the great hall, but paused and turned around. Her face was lit with a vexed glow. One eyebrow raised up and a snarl appeared on her lips.
Ragar, the priest. He is not among the prisoners. Where is he?
He is burned in the fire, my queen. I swear he did not escape.
And you'll ride back there and make certain, won't you? For I will hang your head from my horse's mane if that priest still roams around making trouble for me.
She raised her hand to her throat, and then, quicker than a snake, came across and elbowed Ragar in the nose. Surprised, he staggered backward.
And bring me Cardigan's sword, still dripping with his blood. Do this, and I may still look upon you with favor.
Ragar turned to the men, holding his bloody nose.
Peg them. Get fresh horses. We ride out in an hour.
Irritated, he rolled his eyes, sniffing and slinging the blood from his hand. The soldiers bowed in respect.
My lord?
Said a feeble voice at Ragar's feet. Vera had a hold of his boot and was looking up at him with her beautiful but tormented brown eyes.
Speak, witch,
He said, jerking his foot out of her grasp.
If you desire certain success, I am the only weapon you need. Send me back, my lord. They did not see me. They will surely believe I am on their side now. You know as well as I, the priest could still be alive. Send me back, and I will deliver to you Cardigan's sword and the priest. The priest, I will make it easy for you to catch. I promise. I promise.
Vera cowered, her long blonde hair sweeping the toe of his boot.
You do this for Zorreale?
He asked, crouching down and grabbing a handful of her hair, turning her gaunt face towards him.
Nay, for thee, my lord,
she said tenderly, trying not to wince from the pain of his grip. Releasing his grasp and offering her a hand up, he said,
Well, I will give you a little time.
Though Vera's face lit up with a tender smile, Ragar's mind was already working on something else. For the first time in a long time, the wind was in his favor. Ragar had the loyalty of his fellow mercenaries, a mix of Norman expatriates, Danish seafarers, and other foulmen of Wales who had nothing better to do than work for good coin. He never knew why he let Zorreale treat him so, but that had been their custom since the day they met. They were two thieves, looking for a chance to prove themselves, but for too long, Ragar had taken her beatings. In her presence, he was powerless, but when she left, his mind would clear, and he looked for ways to get out from under her rule. Taking Brecken was more work than he bargained for, but it kept him on top. That's all that mattered. Vera took off again. Ragar never liked her. She was like a dull tool, more work to keep sharp than to just throw away. He sighed and wiped his nose, looking at his blood on the back of his hand. He turned to the prisoners.
Hanging is too easy. Flog them first.
If he couldn't take his anger out on Zorreale, innocent flesh would do. His soldiers bowed, but he could tell he was losing his grip. The more tricks Zorreale performed, there would come a day when they might switch their loyalty. He needed this victory over the priest to hold his power. Cries and pleas from the captives were echoed by the poor slaves who were forced to go about their tasks. Ragar sat on a chair he kept in the courtyard, a reminder to the people, and to himself, that he too could sit on a throne. His bulky frame, covered in furs, slouched into his chair.
Bring me food and a full horn!
He shouted, and a soldier quickly turned and ran for the keep's kitchen. Ragar groaned and reached for the cloth he kept in his jerkin for times like these. Stuffing the pieces in his ears, the cries of people were muted. A handsome man, even for his age, with his chiseled face and bright blue eyes, his cheekbones sharpened the tattoos of his Nordic ancestors that traveled from his neck to his skull, where part of his blonde hair was shaved to show off the piece. The rest of his hair was short on top. One long, thin braid trailed down his back. On the sides of his head, where he shaved, one could see the gray coming in. His chin itched, being penetrated from the newly formed scruff. Ragar absently scratched the irritated skin. Fresh meats and a horn full of mead from his own special reserve made him smile. He teetered on the edges of life and action, manipulation and evil, and had lived past 35. Considered older by most of his crew, he still had to maintain a certain image of vitality to keep from being thrown the old man bone.
That's quite enough for the women. Hang them high, then follow with the others.
He yelled. Not intentionally, however, but because of the cloth in his ears. Ragar took another bite of his food.
Do it outside the castle. I hate crows in the courtyard.
The soldier nodded and walked away. Ragar grinned and began eating again as he pondered the advantages he had over Zorreale now.
When the rebels fail, who in this country will listen to a woman?
He laughed aloud at his amusing thought. Zorreale couldn't rule for long in this dark age. We're going to take just a minute to hear from our awesome sponsors who make this show possible. Then we'll get back to the show.
This episode of 1232 is sponsored in part by Oasis Family Media and its family of companies including Oasis Audio, Enclave Publishing, and Sky Turtle Press. Publishers of the forthcoming epic Edmund Spenser's The Fairy Queen, rendered in modern prose by Rebecca K. Reynolds and illustrated by Justin Gerard. For more information, visit fairyqueen.com. That's fairyqueen.com, or find the link in the description below. Do you like listening to your stories with less advertisements? I understand. Do you and the babushka and the kiddies want interruption-free show? Go to audio-epic.com to buy it. Ad-free, that's audio-epic.com for advertisement-free show. It's easy.
Let's see. Where did we leave off? Flint woke from a fitful sleep to the sound of a hawk's piercing cry. Raising his hand against the morning sun, he saw the bird high above, circling. When it had gone, he rubbed his swollen eyes and felt the soreness in his lungs from the smoke. He looked around him on the rock and noticed Cardigan was down by the water, kneeling. Flint tried to stand, but in doing so, he clanked Cardigan's sword on the stone. The sound made Cardigan turn.
Flint, I owe you my life.
Flint was so sore he fumbled while untying the sword from his belt. Cardigan limped up the rock and lowered himself down beside Flint again. The sun was shining right down on them, warm and reassuring, despite the surrounding devastation.
You look terrible, my friend,
Cardigan said with a grin.
Coming from someone who looks like a wet hairball, that's a compliment.
Flint said dryly, then added,
Besides, I haven't had my coffee yet.
At that, both of them broke out laughing. Cardigan reached over and offered Flint his hand. Flint reached out for a normal handshake, but Cardigan seized his forearm and vigorously shook it.
I beg your forgiveness. I thought you a lesser man, Flint. Hereafter, you are my true friend.
Cardigan said, as he shook Flint from head to toe.
Thanks a lot there, pal.
Flint stammered, smiling. He'd had a lot of proud moments in his life, but earning the respect of this man was possibly the greatest of them all.
What should we do now?
Flint asked, his gut churning at the thought of going back to the camp that was now charred and blackened from the fire.
We must see if there is anyone we can help, anyone alive. God has not spared us, so we may run from trouble. What we have endured is training, Flint, to prepare us for what we must now face.
Cardigan said this with a heavy voice, and Flint suspected he was frightened at what they would discover back at camp.
I sure hope Rona made it.
As do I, my brother. As do I.
Cardigan said, lowering his eyes to study the pebble in his hand. He jerked to action and sent it skipping across the stream's surface.
Hey, have you got a thing for my sister?
Flint asked, half grinning. Cardigan didn't answer, but he looked at Flint and smiled back.
Oh boy, oh no, you're a glutton for punishment, you are.
Flint said, laughing out loud.
You're really asking for it. You know that?
We shall see.
Cardigan replied and struggled to his feet. He stood before Flint, grinning from ear to ear.
I've never encountered a lady that compares.
He gave Flint a hand up.
No, you haven't.
Flint kept on chuckling, shaking his head as they started off in the camp's direction. Within an hour, the priest had found Cardigan and Flint. Cardigan could walk, albeit slowly. Flint discovered his knee needed stitches, so in characteristic style, he whined about it for several minutes.
Have you seen Rona?
Flint ventured to ask, after a brief silence, stepping around a smoky stump.
She, the boy, and the horses are all missing, as are many others. No one has seen them.
Well, how did you find us?
Flint asked, with minor irritation.
We looked for you. I prayed for you, and I knew that you had been spared. The Lord sent me.
Priest Michael's face returned to its former drawn expression. Flint couldn't identify the emotion it conveyed. He'd seen nothing like it before. It was as if the man were laboring under a heavy load, or as if sadness left him with no hope and in the dark. And yet, as Flint stole another glance to study him, he had a strange look of peace, too. Flint, puzzled, pushed his hopelessly scratched glasses up further on his nose, mentioning once again that his knee was killing him. Cardigan hobbled behind in silence, his eyes drinking in the scene before them. They had at least a mile to go before they crossed the meadow. Their long walk to the cave was a grave one indeed. Flint recalled seeing the fire suddenly go out, like birthday candles. It made him tremble all over. And he was so glad to be alive now. He would never forget the horror he had just lived through. The forest was ashen white, and every tree ink black. Smoke still floated in the wind. The fire had almost burned to the town. They dared not speak as they approached the cave. So great was the grief of the sights before them. They had lost more than half their company to the fire. And the smoke and ash were a severe reminder of the terrors of that night. You've been listening to episode 23 of 1232, produced by RumbleStump Entertainment. Written by Callie, Sioux, and Cheyenne Belle. Narrated by Callie, Sioux. Today's voice talents include Jessica King as Zorreale, Jonathan Cook as Ragar, Lauren Harding as Vera, Matt Burke as Cardigan, Corey Keller as Flint Thatcher, and Sid Goodlow as Priest Michael. This episode was mixed and engineered by Jet Black, with editing and sound design by Casey Caballero Sounds. Music by Callie, Sioux, and Jet Black. Mastered by Zach Bryant, 9 Moon Mastering, with cover art by Niall C. Grant. This episode was made possible by our generous and incredible supporters through Kickstarter and Patreon members. You know who you are. To our knights, our bards, Welsh bowmen, wizards, and chieftains, thank you. Continue the adventure in episode 24.